my friends was telling me to write the book because of the fact that me being the first African American that ran Madison Square Garden boxing. I want to thank the Astor and let me come here to do the show. When I got to be like 9 years old, and I came to the gym one time because my mother and father was separated, and I came to the gym with her, and so I saw Emile Griffith putting his championship belt on, and I said, okay, and I saw all these photographers taking pictures, and I said, okay, that's what I want to do. So I came to my father the following week, and I said, Dad, I want to box. And he said, you crazy? He said, no, you can't do this. I said, Dad, I want to do this. And so finally, within weeks, he said, come on, bring your stuff the next week and come to the gym. So every day I left from school, and I went to the gym in Manhattan. And I was living in South Jamaica, Queens. And I came all the way to Manhattan to go to the gym on 28th Street and 9th Avenue at that time it was on. But I took the E train all the way into Manhattan. That was the great part about it. And I got off at 34th Street, and I just walked down to 28th Street and 9th Avenue. I sparred with Emile Griffith a lot of times. And so it just became a thing where he became my big brother. And when I started sparring with him, I learned so much from him that made me who I was as a boxer. And so that was the whole thing about Emile Griffith. I mean, he showed me a lot. But one thing about when we sparred, it was that one day, and you got to understand, from 12 years old all the way up until I hit 24, okay? Because when I came out the service, when I hit 24, Griffin, excuse my language, beat my butt every day from that point. But on that 24th day, when I came out the military, and I was back, and I just came home, I've been in the gym for a while, and Gil and my father said, you're going to box Griffith. So I boxed. I said, it was no big thing. But I, myself, started knowing more about me, and I started doing different techniques in the ring, and I started hitting Griffith more than I have ever hit him. And Gil got mad one day. He said, get the hell out the ring. You know, told him to get out the ring and everything. Next day, the gym was full with people. Teddy Brennan was there, Duke Savannah from the Garden. These are the people that ran the Garden. And I was wondering why there were so many people there. And so Gil was wrapping Griffin's hand, and he said, you hurry up, put your things on. You and Griffin are going to go 8 rounds today. And I said, okay, cool. So I went in there. My father came into the dressing room, and he said, how you feel? And he never, ever came into that dressing room where I was at back in the day. And I said, I'm okay. He said, what's going on? He said, you're going to box Griffin 8 rounds. I said, yeah, okay. So it wasn't no big thing to me because I've been boxing Griffin all my life. But then all of a sudden, I come outside, everybody's standing around, Teddy Brennan, Duke Savannah, all the guys from the Garden, and everybody, a lot of other people standing around. And I said to myself, what's going on? And so when Gil is in the ring, Gil says, okay, you and Griffin going to go at it for real today. All right? And I said, yeah, okay. But it's like, it was no big thing to me because I've been boxing Griffin all my life. But all of a sudden, we started boxing, and everything was going good, and everything. We went 8 rounds. Everybody in the gym just stood up and started clapping. Wow. The military made me a man. And I had, I met some good people in there while I was in the service, but it made me look at life. And it made me look at how things were about things of being good and bad in this world. And so the military really turned my whole head around because, I'm talking about the 70s, the 60s. I'm going through that little era where you had all these people talking and everything, but who do you believe who's talking to you? So I started learning from that military aspect of life, and I started looking at life a whole different thing. And I realized at that time when I went to the military, one thing said to me, Bob, I got to tell you, everybody was my brother and sisters. You know what I'm saying? That's how I looked at it from that point on. You got to understand, nobody thought I could win the gloves, okay, back in those days. And when I went into the open class and fought and beat everybody, I beat the guy that won the championship the year before, and then I beat everybody that was supposed to have been the favorite to win the gloves that year, and I beat them. And that was the whole surprising thing to everybody in the Golden Gloves back. But 1970, I won the open class. I'm gonna keep that word open. Not when I first went. I went to the open with guys with experience and knew how to fight. And I beat everybody in the Golden Glove in the open class in 1970. And they didn't give me no. They gave me all the tough guys from the PAL and everything. So I fought all the tough guys there was.
You also beat Eddie Mustafa in the gloves.
Yes, I did.
Talk about
Yeah,
beating him and what
I beat Eddie Mustafa in the Sum Novice when the first year in the Sum Novice and everything. And Eddie could punch then. I mean, but he was kind of tall and everything. I couldn't understand how Eddie could be so tall and can punch and he had good skills and everything. But I beat him in the sub-novice division and everything.
Talk about just how many great fighters at that time were in the gloves. I mean, so many guys.
Oh, so many. I mean, you can't even. I can't even name the guys that was there. But there were so many guys that became champion of the world later on in life. Like we said, Eddie Mustafa was one. Vito Antuofermo was one. I forget the other kid's name.
So many of them.
There were so many, but these guys became champion of the world. You know, the only person that didn't become champion, Gil told me why I never, he said, because I had bad luck. Yeah. And I always look at Gil, you know, he's always been my second father. And I always said, just if it's not to be, it's not to be. Vito was getting big. You got to understand, he was undefeated. And he had a crowd going behind him. And you got to understand, too, I was in the military when I came home to fight him and everything. So that was the whole big thing, too, about me fighting Vito. So, yeah, Vito was a big moment for me. The fight's over, boom, boom, boom. And I told my father, I said, Dad, here's the money. He said, no, don't worry about the money. You keep it and everything. And then the guy comes into the dressing room. The guy said, where's my money? He said, Harry, you ain't got no money. I said, what you mean ain't got no money? He said, we had to take the money because the ticket money that you're supposed to turn in, you didn't turn in. Then I didn't realize, I called my father. I said, Dad, what happened? He said, I got the money. What my father did, he bet the ticket money that he had and everything. We sold like about 300, 400 tickets. He bet the ticket money on the fight on me. I was like a 5-6 to 1 underdog. And he bet the money. He bet it, and that's how he won so much money for that night and everything.
So you made more money.
He made more money. I didn't make no money. And I saw Benitez as he grew up as a young people. But I knew him and everything else, and I knew his style and all that. But I knew he was a real crafty kid. But I knew one thing about it. I knew Harold Weston could beat him, and that's what I did. But the first time they called it a draw, which I felt I won. And then the second time, if you look at the film, it's out there. I beat him in the 15-round fight. It was close, but I think I won it. And they gave it to him. But you know what they told me? That they already had set up for him to fight Sugar Ray Leonard for the championship, and that was the whole thing about it.
Right. So, how worried were you going into San Juan to fight him for the title? Did you have any fear that you would get robbed?
Oh yeah, I knew that. I knew what I had to do. I had to beat him so convincingly that they couldn't take the decision. But the thing was, knock him out or beat him convincingly, and it was going to be hard to do that because Benitez was a great fighter. I can't take nothing from him. Benitez was a great fighter. And so I knew the fight, no matter how we look at it, was going to be close between them. Because the fight we had in Madison Square Garden was close and everything. I won it, but they gave it to him because there was a riot before the fight and everything. And so they didn't want another riot, and they were supposed to change the decision after, but they didn't do it. So that was the whole thing about it. Pipino Cuevas, I knew Pipino was a good puncher. All right, and knew that, and I was prepared for all that. The fight was going well for us, and I knew that I was going to get him in the late rounds and everything. But my jaw didn't hang in there, and so but Pipino Cuevas was a good fighter. He came to fight. One thing I gotta say, he was like me. He didn't duck nobody. He fought everybody, and so but it was unfortunate not to be for me to win the title, and unfortunately I didn't. else, what happened was I went to Sunnyside to go see one of my friends fight. And when I walked in, they wasn't going to let the show go on because they didn't have enough rounds. So you got to have enough rounds for the show to happen here in New York. And so I came in there and they said to me, they said, Harold, how you feel? I said, oh, I'll fight that guy. And they said, really? And so they went to my father, and my father looked at me and said, you want to fight him? I said, yeah. Now, you got to understand, I'm just coming from the gym. Okay. And so I didn't have nothing with me. So I had to have one of my friends get in my car and drive and go get get my equipment, my trunks and everything else, because I already had my shoes with me and everything. So he had to go get my trunks and my robe and everything. So I had to drive all the way across 59th Street Bridge, come back, and they brought my stuff back. I fought the main event, by the way. And it was only a 6-round fight. But that's the 6th round they needed to let the show go on. So I fought the guy. So I had an undefeated record. At that time was 7-0. And the guy who I was fighting and everything, they were laughing. They thought they were going to knock me out and everything to death. Now, you got to understand, I had just worked out in the gym just hours before. And I just come to Sunnyside to watch one of my friends fight and everything. And then what was so funny, Gil wasn't there, and they called Gil up. And then when Gil picked up the phone, he told my father, and he said, let me talk to little Hal. And that's why he said, how you feel? He said, God, so I saying his names and all this stuff. He said, you call me soon as that darn fight's over, and you let me know what happened, right? Because he was just hysterical about it, right? So the fight goes on, the last fight, the bout and everything. And so the fight's over, I win the fight. And then I'm coming out the ring, and I said, I got to call Gil, right? So I had to go. I went to the telephone booth in Sunnyside, and I called Gil, and the guy said, and Gil said, what happened? I said, I beat him he said, all right. He said, and he started saying his words and everything. He said, I'll see you at the gym tomorrow. Yeah, the Tommy Hearns fight, I watched Tommy as he was coming up and everything, and I just saw he was just knocking guys out and everything. But I knew that he only had several things that he knew. He knew a jab, right hand, and that was it. But, in boxing, you got to have several knowledge about the game and knowing how to defend yourself and know how to, be a good fighter. I learned this from great fighters like Emile Griffith, Rigo Valdez, Johnny Pierce, so guys that were really, and then I had my great teachers, my father and Gil Clancy, that really taught me how to be a good fighter. And so all I saw with Tommy Hearns at that time, he had that 1-2. He was knocking guys out cold. He can punch, but I knew I could take a punch. And so when we made the match with him, I was very intrigued in doing it because I knew I can beat him. I knew I was going to stop him. But don't get me wrong, Tommy's a tough guy, and he comes to fight. But I just knew that he had not been 10 rounds before. If people know, if you ain't never been in that 10 round before, you go with a guy that can fight and you go on 10 rounds, you ain't gonna feel too good going in the last 3 or 4 rounds in a 10-round fight. And that's what I knew I was gonna do. I knew I was gonna stop Tommy in the later rounds and beat him and everything. Because his one thing was coming right at you, jab, right hand, and that was it. But I knew one thing, if I back him up, I was gonna beat him. And I was doing great and everything until my eye went out on me.
Did you, when I hear a lot of people describe detached retina as having like a curtain come down over your eye.
Oh, yeah.
And so you mentioned Johnny Pearsall, who had a similar injury.
Right.
Did you know, when it happened to you, did you know what it was?
No, I didn't know what it was. And when at the time that it was happening, we was doing good in the fight, and I was getting ready to stop Tommy. But when that thing just came down, what happened was the bleeding inside my eye covered my eye, and I couldn't see no more. That's what the doctors told me. And so when I learned about that, and they told me later on, I'm lucky to even have my eye still looking at this time because the retina that I had was completely 90% torn. And you got to understand, the retina is in the back of when I got to the garden and I had the it was so fun. 'Cause I love the guys that did it, Sonny Worthington, Jack Crumpy, and Gil Clancy. And I'm sitting in this room, and Gil is bringing me up to tell Jack Crumpy and Sonny Worthington that they wanted me to run the garden department, so help him run the garden department. Gil was running the department at the time. When Gil told him that he's leaving, and since Sonny Worthington, Jack Crumpy told him, said, who's going to be the assistant Harold? And then Gil told him nobody. That was like the funniest look on everybody's face, saying, what? And so as I realized at that time that Gil was teaching me about the boxing department and about, I was already doing some shows outside of the garden. You got to understand, I was doing some shows, and that's when he brought me in. But when he told me that, he looked at me, he said, I know you can do it, so don't worry about it. Just be doing it the way you did before. You understand, the garden at that time was doing a show every week. Yeah, every week. I remember that. And I had to run the show, put the whole show together from top to bottom. And so, it's part of life. But you know what? God was blessing me. You know what I'm saying? Because God had a path for me. And let's think about that. The path was, I was the first African-American that ran Madison Square Garden, the first boxer to run Madison Square Garden. You can't get no bigger than that. And then I made 8 world champions out of that program.
Who were the 8? Tell me about the 8.
Let me get it off. Hector Camacho was one. A guy named Mark McDowell. One was another, Juan Laporte. There was Iran Barkley. And let me tell you about the Iran Barkley. Bob Arum had him top ranked. They got rid of him. I picked them up and turned them around and made him world champion. So that's what I did with him. And there was... was
McGirt one of yours?
Yes, McGirt. McGirt was one of mine. One guy should have been world champion. He didn't get it. He didn't get the decision. But I'm going to tell him, Carl Williams, when he fought Larry Holmes for the heavyweight championship of the world, he beat Larry, didn't get the decision.
Okay, I got to say, there was one thing I saw online in an excerpt from the book, and this might be one of those times where you say you got to read the book, but did you spend time as a gigolo? Is that true?
Life was growing. I was learning about life. Let me just put it like that, okay, Bobby? And as I started understanding the nature of it, then I realized that a lot of men wasn't doing their job very well.